Alison Cameron, and I was director of the St Nicholas Kirk, East Kirk excavations in 2005 to 6. And today I'm talking to Arthur. Would you like to introduce yourself, Arthur?
Yes, I'm Arthur Winfield, the leader of the Mitherkirk project, and the archaeology was done as one of the early parts of that project.
And so how long have you been involved with the Kirk and the project, Arthur?
Right, the Kirk itself, I was part of the Congregational Church in Belmont Street, and we moved round as lodgers in the Kirk of St Nicholas back in 1995. So since then I have had an involvement. I actually left and went to a different church about 8 years ago, but obviously have still kept that link through the Mitherkirk project.
And then the Open Space Trust, Arthur?
Yes. Well, initially the project was part of the Kirk's effort, and it got to the stage where it was just dominating everything in the Kirk. So 3 things happened in close succession. The first was that the Open Space Trust was set up with a view to taking the project forward. The Kirk then asked the project, the trust, would they take it forward? And then the general trustees of the Church of Scotland gave the building to the trust so that we could actually do that. So all those 3 things happened in quite close succession. So as it now stands, the Open Space Trust is, if you like, the parent body that owns the east end of the building, and we are taking the Mitherkirk project forward.
So this is the Kirk, obviously, just an illustration.
This is the building, yes, and it's a remarkably complicated building, and it has a very complicated history. And I'm not going to dwell on the whole of that at the moment. That is a line drawing by the architects as it appears looking from the Union Street side, or as it would if there weren't any trees in the way. The left-hand end of that building is the West Kirk, and that is still the active church. It's the civic church. Kirking the Council, Remembrance Day services and so on are held in that part of the building. In the centre, at the lower level, you have Drumsile. Parts of Drumsile date back to about 1140, so quite old in the life of the city. It has been altered quite a few times on the way through, and in fact what you actually see there in the great south door were much later additions. And above it you've got the spire. Until the 1870s it was a much smaller wooden spire, but there was a fire in 1874. The spire burnt down, and so that stone spire was built in 1878 to replace it. So that is all, if you like, the Kirk of St Nicholas side of the building. To the right-hand side, we have the former East Kirk, which is where it is. And you can obviously see the larger windows there and the lower ones, which were part of the gallery and below the gallery of the Kirk building itself. You can also notice that the land slopes down, and as it slopes down, there are other bits appearing. And that bit is St Mary's Chapel, which we will come on to. But that is an earlier part of the building. We'll explain why it is there. But that whole part to the right of that drawing is where the Mitherkirk project is.
So this is cutaways, Arthur, of the
Indeed,
East Kirk.
yes. And I think this helps visualize, if you like, the inside as opposed to the outside. If you take the left-hand one first, we've got what we're hoping to do in terms of different floor levels going in. Internally, originally, it was a church floor with a gallery, and that was it. The archaeological dig took out below the church floor. And so we have this area here, which is coloured blue, and below it, the white area at the moment is partly dug out, partly soil still, but that is going to be below a new floor level. And the box structure you can see in the middle of that white area is a crypt, which I will talk about later, but that is to house the bones from the reburial. Moving upwards then, we have the blue area, which was the original church, the archaeology site. We then have the red area, which was the church floor level and underneath the gallery. Moving up again to the yellow area, we have where the gallery was. The gallery is going to come out, but the floor level will go in at the lower level of the gallery. And then above that, we have this sort of lilac-y colour. And what we can do is to put another floor in above what used to be the lower level of the gallery. And we've still got about 17 or 18 feet up to ceiling height. So it's a very high building. And as you can see, the floor at the top level doesn't go to the outer wall. And that's so that we can maintain views of the glass windows properly. If you then move across to the right-hand drawing, you've got the same basic structures of the original church floor level, gallery level, upper space. But you've got this pinky coloured area, and that is St Mary's Chapel. St Mary's Chapel was built in the mid-1400s. There's no exact date for that, but it certainly goes back a long way, and was built as a separate building to support an expansion of the church over the top. And if we move on to the next longitudinal sectional drawing, you can maybe see better how this actually fits. So the red area, the ground level of the original church building, sits on top of that pink area of St Mary's Chapel. And the reason it needs to do that is because the ground is sloping away there, and the building was far smaller, and you will have pictures of this later on through the presentation, but the building was much smaller, and they couldn't expand towards the east because of land down into the Pataki Burn. And so they built, say about mid-1450, give or take, St Mary's Chapel as a freestanding building in preparation for building over the top. And so by 1500, St Mary's Chapel had been incorporated into a larger church structure, but not the church that we've got nowadays. That's all disappeared.
So that was quite nice, Arthur. We obviously found evidence of this on the dig, and how it was built first, and the church was built on. I mean, I like this because you were saying in the previous one, this is where the crypt's going, so below the dig. I like it because you can see this vault here, which sort of linked the churches, different levels of the churches, but inside the church.
It did. Have we got the picture of that to follow? Yeah. Yes. Once the expansion of the church had taken place, what we now call St Mary's Chapel was probably used by the clergy as a vestry, and they then needed to proceed up into the sanctuary upstairs. And this staircase that you can see in the photograph on the left there is showing part of that staircase that was uncovered during the archaeology. It was enclosed probably when the church was rebuilt in the 1830s, but I can't be certain that that was when it was done, by this stone vaulted covering, which you can see in the right-hand photograph. So those steps will be dating from probably early 1500s, and our architect was quite keen to try and use those steps as a new way of linking through St Mary's Chapel through into the upstairs part of the building. Fortunately, the headroom doesn't allow that, so it's going to be kept as a feature, and there will obviously be interpretation explaining it to visitors as they pass it. because you will pass it on the way in, and explain how it was. Yes, so it's quite an old bit, and it does link the old and the new quite nicely.
Yes. And we're going to come on to talk a little bit about other things that are going to be left in the development, so we can talk about that. But I just wanted to go back in time slightly because although I know you weren't in the church in the early 70s, but 2005 wasn't the first dig that there'd been, and John Hunter came up in the early 70s and did an excavation prior to a new heating system being put in Drums Isle, well, in the oil chapel, in fact.
Yes, it's underneath the oil chapel, is it? Yes.
Yeah, you can see the excavated area here. And so we obviously looked at this before we started the dig to determine whether the remains were going to be well preserved. And of course, he found a lot of building remains and a lot of burials. And you can just see a couple of the images here from the dig. You can see piles of bones here, which must be what we would call disarticulated, so mixed up bones moved by grave diggers. And obviously you can see some, complete skeletons here.
Yes, Provost Davidson is reputed to have been buried in that area. He was killed at the Battle of Harlow and was carried back to the Kirk of St Nicholas for burial. It is reputed it was in that part of Drums Isle, and his effigy is housed in that part of the church as well.
Yes, yes. So then if we go on to, 2005, you commissioned Aberdeen City Council Archaeology Unit to carry out what we would call an evaluation. So at that point, the floors were still in, and we dug some little trenches below the floors and basically found burials and walls, which of course we couldn't really interpret at that stage. So into the beginning of 2006, all the floors were taken up, leaving this, which is a big open area for the excavation to take place.
Yes. And so you can see at the end there, the wall across and the floor just above it, where the trestle table is, the boxes. That table and the boxes are on the old church floor level. And that wall that was being exposed across the picture is the back wall of St Mary's Chapel. So that bit of floor, which has all the boxes and so on, is on top of St Mary's Chapel. But you can also, on that photograph, see the gallery around, and you can see the apse and the lovely stained glass window that is there. That will be quite a feature in our finished building.
And you can see that we've we got you to cover up the other windows, just in case when we were working next to them, we didn't want to damage them.
Yes.
That's why they're covered up.
Yes, all that stained glass goes back to the century or thereabouts. You can see two of them boarded up there. The left hand of the two boarded up ones is one by Douglas Strawn, who was a local glass worker. His very first window is down in St Mary's Chapel as well, and he went on to big things right through to the 1930s, 1940s. Yeah.
And then just a different angle. These are quite early on in the dig, so we were doing, we were excavating these sort of later burials, and I see there's lots of stone. We had obviously to move a lot of stone, but this is just showing a different angle of the dig itself.
Looking from the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you obviously commissioned us to do the work, but were there anybody in the church who was against this work being done, or hesitant in any way about it?
I think we were probably all hesitant because we didn't know what we were letting ourselves in for. But in a way, there was a commitment to do the project, and we had to do the archaeology before we could do anything really, because even at the simplest idea that we had of just filling in the center of the gallery and making two floors, we needed to put supports in to hold that new floor, and that meant digging down. It was clearly an archaeological site, and so there had to be archaeology. We bit the bullet, as it were, and said, right, let's, rather than just do little pockets for the pillar bases, support bases, let's do the whole hog and create the third floor.
Yeah. I mean, when we started, we, most of the people who were in the church, the congregation, and were so supportive of us. We obviously had lots of dealings with you and all the ladies who made the tea and everybody who showed people around, and we actually formed quite a nice group of archaeologists and people from the church.
It was a quite remarkable time. It was a real pulling together. Yes, there really was. And a really positive attitude. I mean, one of the things we did was to divide notionally the whole area up into 1 metre squares, and people could buy, in inverted commas, a square. And each week, you archaeologists between you chose a find of the week, owned the square in which it was found, got to have their name put up along with the object on display in the drum's aisle. And that just captured people's imagination. Yes.
No, it really did. We felt that on the dig as well, that people would come and look at their square and ask if anything had been found in it. So
yes,
it was really good. Yeah. So just another view of the dig. I mean, we were getting down a bit, and to some of the earlier burials, and this is the sort of view you'd have got if you were on the gallery, looking down on us. And
yes, and a lot of people were, as we'll be coming on to see.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned that some of the features that you were going to keep. I mean, this on the church is one of the features.
Very pleased.
Probably the earliest wall standing in Aberdeen at the moment.
As far as
burials,
we know.
Yeah, with its burials roundabout, and you can see some in situ here. These burials sort of radiating out from it.
Yes. Yes.
But that was a very popular feature, and one we were obviously able to keep at the end of the day.
Yes, and if you go, you'll see the viewing window later. But if you go to the viewing window today and look down, you can still see a small part of that wall. The rest of it is hidden underneath your feet. But once we get the main thing done, this will be kept as a feature. We obviously would probably never will know exactly how old it was, but we will keep that. Unfortunately, those burials are not as clear now as they are in that photograph, because the soil is quite granular, and just with time eroded. Even though there's been nothing really to erode it, there has been a gradual softening of the edges of those burial pits.
Although, of course, we've had a lot of people in there. We take people in on Doors Open Day and various other, I take groups in, and I try to get them to walk carefully around about there. But
indeed, precisely, yes.
And I mean, that'll all be filled. The grave cuts themselves will be filled in, presumably.
Well, if one of them was adequate to just keep it as a visual reminder of what there had been there. But we also have that very detailed drawing which your team did of the layout of all of them. And again, that would be part of the interpretation in that area.
Absolutely.
Yes, and the other thing which you can't see in that photograph is that the floor associated with that apse is also there.
Yes, so in the inside here, this is a bit of the wall which has been taken out by much later grave diggers. But yes, inside you can see there's a couple of mortar floors surviving inside.
Yes.
So a church which could be as early as the 11th century. As you say, we're not going to have an exact date for it, but
no, it's unlikely.
Yes, but I mean, incredibly exciting find. And I mean, I've talked at conferences of church archaeologists who said that this is, it's virtually unique. That virtually no excavations like this have taken place, and to have these burials of children radiating out is fantastic.
So it was amazing being almost part of it every day for a year. Yes,
yeah, that's right.
A real privilege.
Yeah. And then obviously some of the other bits of the excavation which were incredibly popular and you know, very, very visual. I mean, this at the top is the end of a mid to late 12th century church wall.
Yes.
And so then these are all the individuals who wanted to be buried with their head as close to the east end of that church as possible. But in the bottom you see the wall of St Mary's Chapel. So we're in the gap between the 15th century church at the bottom and the 12th
Yes.
century church at the top.
Yes, and this is what I was saying earlier about St Mary's Chapel having been built as a separate building, quite a distinct building from the church as it then existed. I mean, the existing church was way too small. This was really the problem, and that's why in the early 1400s they started planning for the expansion to take place. And it started by the middle of the century. It wasn't completed for dedication until 1498, but it still wasn't finished. And some of the woodworking and so on was still going on through into about 1515. So it was a huge project in terms of time. But it does illustrate quite nicely the way that you had the separate building and then incorporated in. And a huge number of skeletons, and one on top of the other as well.
Yes, I mean, this shows you've obviously got a later burial here, cutting through an earlier one.
Yes.
You know, lots of individual children. But I like this, the feet of these ones have all gone. And that's presumably when they cut this trench to build St Mary's in the 1400s, that they took away the feet. There seemed to be no other explanation apart from that they had just not noticed, the builders had not noticed and taken away foot bones.
Yes, and it perhaps illustrates something that we lose track of thinking, that this whole area was the kirkyard. When the building at the top was built, this was still the kirkyard, and they expanded the building across the kirkyard. Partly why we had a lot of burials within the church built in the 12th century. And then you had the buildings, the burials around the kirkyard, around that building, which then got incorporated again when the expansion took place in the 15th century.
Yeah.
So there has been that continual expansion across existing kirkyard over the centuries.
Which is why it was so amazing for the archaeologists to excavate this, because there was such good preservation of the earlier churches and the graveyards associated with them, which was again quite unique.
Yes.
Yeah. And when we were digging, we had 14,000 people, an estimate by me, but it's around about the right number.
I think it's in the right order. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in 2006, including, I mean, about 2,000 on Doors Open Day, which was, I remember it vividly.
Yes.
Traffic management around the church was a huge thing. We had all of your volunteers were making sure people were, But we also had a lot of school children, lots of classes, and this is some images from you touring the classes.
Yes, doing my tour guide role. The one on the left, well, both are in the West Kirk. The one on the left is me showing them an effigy on the windowsill. It's, again, one of those things that doesn't turn many people on, but effigies do excite some people, and we have the largest collection in Scotland of medieval effigies, and that was just one that I was showing to the children. On the way round to the next photograph on the right-hand side, where we have these needlework panels. These were all created by a lady called Mary Jameson. She was the daughter of George Jameson, who was a Royal Academician. Just across the road on School Hill, there's a plaque on the wall to where their house used to be. But she, with some friends, created 5 needlework panels telling Bible stories. And these were purchased by the city to use in the Kirk in 1688. So these were made in the years prior to that. Again, exact dates not known, but 1660, 1670, 1680-ish. And you can tell by the size of us that they're pretty big. There are only 4 in the Kirk now. What happened to the fifth is a mystery. We made the children tour around the building before they were allowed to look at the bones, which is what they'd really come for, of course. And each time we took them to this picture, and I'm pleased that's a Bible story, and I'm pleased to say none of them actually got it wrong. Every single group, someone recognized that it was Moses in the bulrushes. Yes.
Excellent. No, they must have really enjoyed that, because a lot of them won't have been in such a spectacular building with all these fantastic things. To see a knight made in stone, you know, I mean, with armor or
yes.
clothing, and fantastic. Yeah.
But, and so we did that. We did that one tapestry. We took them through the oil chapel and let them see the stained glass window there, which is modern. I mean, that's 1990. But a very spectacular window. And then they were allowed to come up here into the gallery and look down at the dig. And you can see they're looking down at the dig and enjoying it. Yes.
Yes, I mean there were obviously burials being excavated most of the time, so nearly every visitor will have seen some. And we always let people know that we were excavating that, and I don't think there was a single person who obviously didn't want to see that. But yeah, so here we have one of the archaeologists leading the tour of the dig and showing them what we were finding at the time. They got to walk along our scaffolding as well, which of course we had to have built to allow us to walk around the areas of the dig as we dug down. So they really enjoyed all that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and this is quite nice when you can see then the view. So they're looking down on the diggers. As the excavation progresses. So, and they were shown finds from the dig as well.
Yes.
And then, of course, we ran tours from here. So on a Monday and a Friday, I think, was it?
It was, yes. We were open from lunchtime, and you could have teas and coffees out in Drum's Isle. And each Monday and Friday, someone from the archaeology team gave a talk in the oil chapel. So we were able to use the seating there. And then people were allowed up in the gallery to look and watch. And they did. And there were occasions when there was no space available at the front of the gallery to look down. It was just solid with people looking. Yes.
Yeah. I remember because we had a microphone because there were so many people sometimes.
Yes, that's right. And adults rather than children. And one of the archaeologists explaining, and I suspect it's actually you, a third in from the right. It looks a bit like you.
Me, yes, I think it is. Yeah, that's when I used to lean over. I took a place to lean over so I could talk to people.
Yes.
But as you said, there was a lot of times when it was much more busy than that.
That was a quiet day. Yes, it really was. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah. But then, I mean, we found some amazing things. So on the left, you've got Gemma Much, who was one of the archaeologists, uncovering one of the hats that we found. And on the right, this individual who had 6 blade wounds to the head, a little nick on the forehead here, but several other wounds, including one on the top teeth. And it was really it captured people's imaginations, these stories about individuals, obviously, who'd been buried in St. Nicholas a long time ago.
Yes. And the number of times I've been asked, who was he? And, but more pointedly, was he a casualty of the Battle of Harlow?
Yes,
that was when the anniversary was taking place. That was obviously uppermost in people's minds. Yeah.
Yes, well, we haven't got everything radiocarbon dated yet, but obviously we'll do that, and then we'll have a century at least for him. But I think in the future people will be able to do more accurate dating, and so he'll have to leave to the future probably. But
Indeed.
I mean, I think he was a career soldier, so he certainly could easily have been then. Yeah.
Yes.
And then other individuals, I really like this link to Santiago de Compostela, where people would have gone on a pilgrimage in the medieval period from St. Nicholas Church. They would have bought a scallop shell or 2 in the cathedral. So on the left, you've got one that's over the thigh of an individual, and the right as there's two next to the head. So they would have been on, you know, a bag or on a hat that had come back from the cathedral.
Yes. Yes, because I believe the practice was to wear the scallop shell on a sort of satchel on your above your thigh as you were walking. So the left-hand one is presumably how he was buried, with that satchel.
Yeah, no, that's right. But fantastic to get links from your church to, you know, places like Santiago de Compostela.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Right. Yes, I mean, imagine that journey.
Then, this woman, this middle-aged woman who was buried right on the south wall of the church there, she had quite a severe medical condition, like a vitamin D deficiency. But underneath her, there was this lead token that was found, which shows the Virgin Mary with the body of Jesus over near a Pietà.
Yes.
And we tried to find out where she might have gone, whether she'd gone on a pilgrimage somewhere. But talking to pilgrimage people, they didn't know where this church was. And it's really tempting to wonder if this is St. Nicholas's badge, medieval pilgrim badge from your St. Nicholas church.
Well, it would be very interesting if we can find out at some stage. It would depend on carbon dating of it, for one thing, I suppose. But St. Mary's Chapel was initially dedicated to for a group of ladies who concentrated on the suffering of Mary at the time of Christ's crucifixion. And so the Pieta is a symbol of that. And in fact, in St. Mary's Chapel, the central stained glass window features the Pieta as well. So it might have been, I mean, that stained glass window is modern relative, it's about 1900, but that focus on St. Mary might have gone on even before St. Mary's Chapel was built. I'm not aware of anything, but that doesn't mean to say that it wasn't the case.
Absolutely.
And she had obviously a medical condition, and so maybe this was a lucky charm type thing, not a charm, but sort of trying to invoke God's healing through carrying a token of his suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might have been something like that.
Yes, yes. We talked about this window, and I've got a picture now of this. So this is if you were coming into the church and you weren't going up to the gallery, you would come in and you could look through this window and watch us digging.
On the right-hand side, yes, and that was very popular as well. And it's still there. You can still look. And if you go close to the window and look down at your feet, that's where you can see that early apse. So it's just underneath that bit of floor. Yeah.
And so you were fundraising all during the time that we were digging, and obviously ever since you have been.
Indeed, that's true. Yes. And still are. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
It's a big thing in a way. I mean, we've obviously raised quite a lot of money to get as far as we have, £2.5 million or something like that. We've obviously done the dig, we've done all the exterior repair work, all the stained glass has been repaired or restored, we have a new roof pointing, so all that sort of work has been done. We are at the moment in receipt of some funding, which the work should actually have already been, or part of it should have already been completed if there hadn't been the lockdown. They were due to start the following week, building that crypt for the reburial. And the other major part of work which will be coming, we hope within the next few months, will be making wheelchair access into St. Mary's Chapel. It's quite an important thing with that. And we're hoping that will be done over the winter, I guess it will be now, because obviously all time schedules are out of the window.
course.
But we have those things in train. But what we need now is the big money to do that internal fit out that you saw in those early drawings.
Yeah.
And, you know, in this climate after Brexit, after the lockdown, maybe the local economy needs a kickstart. And maybe this is one of the things that could provide that. Doing this sort of work.
Yes, yes. I mean, you've been getting publicity. You know, this is the local paper, Evening Express, and you know, getting and so trying to get the information out there for people that you know, you're open to funding.
We're open to discussions with anyone who wishes. We're happy to talk. And there's been a much more recent article in the press, which is not actually published in the sense of appearing in paper, but if you go onto either of the Aberdeen Journal's websites, in the tabs across the top, there's one nostalgia. And if you click on that, you will find an article from about 3 weeks ago, something like that maybe, which looks at the whole Kirk. So I think it's headed something about the silent bells of Aberdeen, but there's a lot about the Kirk itself and about the project in that.
Yeah. And I mean, we got a lot of publicity actually about the archaeology as well, including the cover of Current Archaeology in 2011. So, I mean, the finds really were astonishing, and you know, archaeologists were.
Yes, and that's that lovely love token as well.
Yes, that's right. The heart-shaped brooch over the heart of this individual.
Yes.
So just about the future, I mean, I put this in because this is Carmen, who was one of our diggers, human bone specialist, and then geophysics specialist. She came back later after the dig and looked under the floor of Drum's Isle and found there were burials and more walls, of course.
Yes. I mean, it would be lovely to dig Drum's Isle up and the West Kirk, but there's no way. Just to sort out that. I mean, all right, we've got that early apse. There must have been the rest of the building somewhere under Drum's Isle and the West Kirk. How big was it? We've no idea. It would be lovely to know.
Yes, I mean, you can see some things on a survey which suggests that there's walls, but of course there's a lot of graves dug in there, so it's a bit disturbed, but yeah. And then just to finish off, Arthur, this is obviously your contact details, the Open Space Trust, Facebook page, Twitter.
Yes, and we acknowledge as well the people who've helped us. A lot of those photographs are from the Aberdeen Art Gallery and Museums. Those are links to other photographs that Darren Wright took, where he's got a 360-degree camera, and there are various locations within the building, and they're fascinating to look at those. And we're hoping to create a YouTube channel. We will put links up on our website once we've got that far, but we're hoping to be able to expand the information available. There is quite a lot on the Trust website. We have been doing a blog. There's over 100 different blogs on there on different aspects of the project, the archaeology, the West Kirk and Drum's Isle, and of some of the people in the graveyard, buried people in the graveyard, I should say. So that there's a mine of information there. There should also be on the website a link to all the different weekly reports during the archaeology. Each week a report was put up on the city website, and it's been through various stages of archiving, and I haven't checked recently, but the links that I've put on there were to the latest position for the archive. So assuming it's still there, you can access each of those weekly reports.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Arthur.
You're welcome.